There was something in the Vale do Ribeira, a silence between the mountains, a weight in the suffocating June nights. João Ribeiro knew that silence well. He was part of it. He was 18 years old when it all happened, and he never told that story without trembling. It was 1950, and João lived alone in a humble neighborhood of Pedro de Toledo, a small town wedged between the wilderness and the mountains, where life moved slowly and faith was taken seriously. But João had a gift. He could pull music from the accordion like no one else. He was called for festivals, dances, baptisms. He was the sound that made people forget life's hardships. That June, he was invited to play at a dance, one of those remote ones, deep in the woods, where you could only get by horse or ox cart. The offer was good: money, hot food, and lively people. João didn't think twice. He put on his white shirt, packed the accordion in its leather case, and left at dusk on foot down the dirt road. He arrived at the hall after night had fallen, a simple, long building with low windows lit by oil lamps and surrounded by cheerful voices. Only one door gave access to the dance hall. Inside, colorful paper flags hung from the ceiling. The smell of food filled the air, and the wooden floor creaked under dancing feet. João sat on the small musician's platform, adjusted his accordion, and began to play. Time seemed to fly by between the foros, zotes, and country tunes. But then, João saw him, a short man, wild, disheveled hair, eyes too deep for such a small face. He entered through the only door, without a sound. He didn't smile, he didn't dance, he just watched, as if searching for something, or someone. João couldn't explain why, but his body froze inside. Something about that man was wrong, very wrong. João tried to focus on his accordion, but the man's eyes followed him, and that's when the dance turned into a nightmare. João looked around. People were still dancing, laughing, drinking, but something had changed in the air. It was as if the lights had dimmed, even though the lanterns burned the same. The man with disheveled hair was now moving through the crowd, silently. He wasn't dancing. He wasn't even walking naturally. He just slid between people, always with that gaze, as if searching for a thread to pull. João's fingers trembled on the keys of the accordion. He had played in many places. He had seen drunkards, jealous men, and even fights, but never that. Suddenly, the strange man got behind one of the dancers and, without warning, kicked the person's heel. A harmless act, childish, but timed to perfection. The man turned and disappeared into the crowd, and the person who had been kicked believed it had been the person behind them. The reaction was instant. An angry push, a heated word, another shove. In seconds, the dance turned into chaos. People were screaming, punching, falling over tables. João tried to stop playing, but the sound of the accordion lingered in the air, like it had detached from him. He backed away, holding his instrument tight. He wanted to leave, but there was only one door, and right by it stood the man with wild hair, watching, not smiling, not blinking. João took a deep breath, stepped down from the platform, and forced his way through the confused crowd, heart pounding in his chest. He was a few feet from the door when the lightning came. A blinding white flash, a deafening thunderclap, and the lightning struck inside the hall, right in the center, right where they danced. A shockwave of heat and sulfur spread through the place. Smoke filled the air. The wooden walls groaned. Screams turned into animal howls. And in the midst of the smoke, the man was no longer at the door. He had vanished. João dropped the accordion case. His legs moved by instinct. He crossed the threshold, ran into the night, and didn't look back. He didn't know who was still alive in there. He didn't want to know. All he wanted was to get home and forget. But some things don't let themselves be forgotten. João didn't stop running. The path was dark. Only the sound of his own breath and the faint creak of the accordion case in his hand reminded him he was still alive. His clothes were soaked with sweat, his heart beat so fast it echoed in his ears, and the image of that lightning strike, that man's eyes, seemed burned into his skull. He reached the edge of town just before dawn. The sky was beginning to lighten with a faint bluish haze, but Pedro de Toledo was still asleep. João entered his street, barely recognizing the shapes of the little wooden houses around him. When he reached his home, a tiny shack of one room and creaking door, he breathed deeply, trying to believe he had left the nightmare behind. But when he opened the door, what he saw took his breath away. There, on his bed, the same bed where he rested, prayed, dreamed. There were masks, dozens of them, maybe more. Masks that weren't there before. Masks that shouldn't exist. They covered the entire bed, stacked, piled, layered. Some looked like animals, others were almost human, but twisted. Each had an expression frozen in horror, pain, or madness. Some had missing eyes, others had sharp teeth carved into wood. Some were made of leather, bone, or cloth. Others seemed burned, scorched, cracked, and worst of all, they smelled. Sulfur, rot, ash. João stumbled back, almost dropped the accordion. His knees buckled and he held onto the doorframe. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. Not a single sound came out. Who had done that? How had they entered? How had no one seen? He didn't know, and part of him didn't want to know. João didn't sleep, he didn't eat, he didn't cry. He spent hours just looking at them. Those masks, those faces. Were they watching him? Did they want something? Were they waiting? The sun began to rise, but the light didn't help. João remained by the doorway, eyes fixed on that bed, on the masks. He hadn't slept, and he wouldn't. As the morning slowly painted the town golden, no one knocked on his door, no one passed by, no neighbor noticed a thing. Pedro de Toledo went on with its life, unaware, as if the night had never happened. But João knew. He knew he couldn't leave those things there. He didn't know where they came from, who brought them, or what they meant. But he knew they had to burn. He gathered them one by one, avoiding touching them directly when possible. Used old cloths, the corner of a coat, whatever he could. Some masks seemed to stick to the sheets. Others made faint sounds when moved, like air escaping through invisible mouths. João didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. He carried them all to the back of his house. In the center of the backyard, he piled wood, dry leaves, paper, and created a mound. He placed the masks in the center, one by one, like a funeral ritual. Then he lit a match, and the fire began. First came the smoke, dark, thick, heavy. It didn't rise, it swirled, as if reluctant to leave. Then came the smell. It was worse than before, a mix of burned rubber, old flesh, dust from forgotten graves. But João didn't stop watching. As the flames grew, some of the masks cracked, others melted, but some seemed to scream. There were no mouths, no eyes, but the fire hissed and roared as if something inside those objects resisted destruction. One mask, the last one, took the longest to burn. It was dark red, almost black, with no expression, only two hollow holes where eyes should be. It stared back, even as it blackened, even as the fire consumed it. João stepped back, tears in his eyes, not from sadness, but from smoke, from rage, from fear, from faith. When the last ember went out, he looked up at the sky. He whispered something, entered his house, and didn't touch the accordion again. Not that day, not the next, not ever. After the fire, there was no relief, no peace, only silence. João closed the door of his house, sat on the old wooden stool, and stared at the floor for hours. The accordion, red, worn, faithful, lay abandoned in the corner, inside its leather case. He didn't touch it, not even to move it out of sight. As the sun rose high over Pedro de Toledo, life outside returned to normal. Children played in the dust streets. A vendor passed by with a cart full of bananas. The church bell rang for the first mass. But João heard none of it. He was inside himself, trapped in the echo of a melody that should never have been played. He hadn't eaten, hadn't bathed. His soul had not returned from that night. At dusk, as the shadows lengthened and the cold began to creep into the cracks of the house, João stood up. He walked to a small wooden shelf. There lay his Bible, old, faded, with pages worn by the hands of time and devotion. He opened it without choosing a page, let it fall where it would, and read. His lips moved slowly, silently, as if the verses might purify the room, as if they could undo what he had seen or what had followed him home. He knelt on the cold floor, hands over the Bible, eyes closed, and prayed. He didn't ask for miracles. He didn't demand answers. He only made one promise, one vow. He would never play the accordion at a party again, not for money, not for joy, not even for memory. If that was the price for having escaped what others might not have, then so be it. He would let the silence speak for him, and João kept his word until the end of his days on this earth. The red accordion remained silent, locked away, untouched. Sometimes neighbors would hear faint notes echoing from his window, but they always assumed it was memory playing tricks. João never denied what happened, but he never spoke of it again. He only said, "Some music is not meant to be heard by human ears." Pedro de Toledo was a small town. In places like that, stories don't stay quiet for long. And even though João never spoke again about what happened that night, others did. They talked about the fight, about the lightning, about the panic, and some swore they had seen something in the middle of the smoke. Not a man, not an animal, but something else, something that watched, that moved without touching the floor, that disappeared before anyone could scream. Most laughed it off. A party gone wrong. Too much alcohol, too much excitement, but a few didn't laugh. An old woman said she had seen that same man, short, hunched with messy hair, many years ago at a different celebration, in another town, with the same result, a fire, a scream, and then masks. Another man from the edge of the valley claimed that his uncle had found burned wood and melted cloth in the forest days after that fateful dance, and someone, anonymously, left a small black mask at the door of the town's chapel. No one ever claimed it. The people of the valley began to whisper again. Old stories were remembered, old prayers were whispered at night, because in Pedro de Toledo they know that the forest listens, that the wind carries names, and that not all music is meant for joy. Some songs wake up the wrong things. João kept his distance. He stopped going out. He no longer accepted invitations. He lived with silence, with prayer, and with the heavy weight of memory. And even though no one ever asked directly, people began to notice. He never smiled again the way he used to. His hands trembled sometimes, as if remembering keys pressed too long. And at night, some neighbors said they heard the soft sound of a red accordion, playing alone, in the dark. Years passed, but time did not erase the weight of that night. João Ribeiro aged in silence, quiet, discreet, almost invisible. He still lived in the same small house, on the same dirt street, with the same view of the trees beyond the hills. No one dared bring up the story again. No one dared ask if the masks had truly appeared, or if that man, the one with wild hair, had ever been real. But the memory lingered. One evening, after many years, a group of children passed near João's house, laughing, singing, tossing pebbles at fences. and suddenly they stopped. From inside João's house, a melody escaped. Soft, fragile, carried by the night wind like a whisper, the sound of an accordion, his accordion, playing a waltz no one knew, a song that seemed to come from very far away, but also from inside each of them. The children froze, listened, and then ran home, terrified. The next day, a neighbor knocked on João's door. No answer. They knocked again. Nothing. They forced the door open and found him, João Ribeiro, kneeling beside his Bible, hands resting over it, eyes closed. He had passed away in prayer. The room was in order, clean, silent. Only the red accordion lying in the middle of the bed had a single string broken, as if it had been played. One last time. No one touched the instrument. No one tried to keep it. It was buried with him, under a grey sky, accompanied by silence. To this day, those who live near the cemetery in Pedro de Toledo say that sometimes, on cold June nights, you can still hear the sound of an accordion somewhere between the tombs and the trees. João Ribeiro was buried on a Thursday morning. Few attended, just a handful of neighbors, and a priest who barely knew his name. There were no speeches, no flowers, only the cold earth and the red accordion resting atop the coffin, as if it had always belonged to the silence. But the story didn't end there. Not for the valley, not for Pedro de Toledo, and not for those who listened too closely. Some time after the burial, a group of young people decided to hold a festa junina near the forest, just as João had once done. A simple party, they said, to honor traditions, to celebrate life. They lit bonfires, hung up colorful flags, cooked corn cakes and sweet rice, and of course played music, accordion music. At first, everything went well, dancing, laughter, stories shared around the fire. But around midnight, the music changed. One of the boys playing the accordion paused. He looked at the instrument in his hands and swore it wasn't the song he had chosen. Another felt a chill in his back, though the fire still burned high, and a girl near the edge of the clearing said she saw someone standing among the trees, short, hunched, hair like a nest, eyes that didn't blink. He didn't come closer, he just watched. And as the wind picked up and the fire began to hiss, one of the dancers, without knowing why, turned to push another. Another pushed back. Someone screamed, a bottle shattered in seconds, chaos just like before. And then a lightning bolt, right in the center of the party, smoke, sulfur, screams. When it cleared, the clearing was empty, no more laughter, no more music, and where the fire had burned, a single mask, dark red, expressionless, still warm. No one claimed it. Since then, no one has ever thrown a festa junina in that part of the valley again, not near the trees, not near the wind. And every time June arrives and the accordions begin to play across the town, someone always asks, will it be the right song? Will it be the right hands? Or will João's dance return? Because some melodies never die, some promises echo beyond the grave, and some spirits still wait for the last note.